everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of the Social Wave Project podcast. My name is Sarah Francis, but everyone calls me Saz. And usually once a month, I upload interviews, or like share interviews rather, on various topics that really matter, featuring special guests. And I know I was going to leave the special interview until July, but I decided to fit one more in because today, 21st of June, is World Humanist Day, and I couldn't think of anyone more better to hop into do the special episode of podcast. And we have Lauren with us today, all the way from the Big Apple. Lauren, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's getting warmer, and I'm just really thrilled to be on this podcast today to talk about very important issues revolving around autism.
Oh, that's fantastic, though. But we'll probably let you introduce yourself, Lauren.
Well, yes, my name's Lauren Melissa, and I'm also known as Autienelle on Instagram and also Twitter. And I am an autistic social justice influencer and self advocate. I operate mostly out of Instagram, helping and supporting and working alongside fellow autistics to find, discover, and sustain coping strategies that we create for ourselves in order to really embrace ourselves as we strive for a more inclusive world.
But that's really lovely though, because I know I saw your Instagram page and you're always very active on Instagram doing like a lot of stuff really. And it's just amazing to see what you do. But then we'll jump into the question straight away, just because I know that you've got a lot to say about what you want to share. So the first question, when were you first diagnosed with autism and how did you feel while you were going through your diagnosis process? Because I know, unlike in the UK, going through the process of being diagnosed is quite different in America.
Definitely, there are a lot of differences. In the United States, we still primarily diagnose autism using the DSM-5. It was definitely a process to get to the point of that evaluation. I was not diagnosed with autism until I was 23 years old. And that is not an uncommon experience for many autistic socialized as girls. In the US, and I think globally, to be honest, autism is often viewed primarily through the traits of boys or those socialized as boys. And so I am one of the many autistic girls whose traits presented differently. And as a result, I did not receive an early diagnosis. That is kind of true, but also my mother did notice some things about me that were neurodivergent. However, since I am Black biracial, my mother is African American, and because I am a girl in a patriarchal society, my mother was concerned that if I received an autism diagnosis, I would have too much stacked against me in the public education system. And so she chose not to pursue an autism diagnosis for me, even though I would STEM and I did a lot of toe walking. I really didn't care for humor, and I was a constant monologuer talking about my special interests. I was also a late walker, but an early talker. As I'm sure you can tell, I am hyperverbal, although I do go through some semi-verbal and nonverbal moments. Anyway, back to the point at hand. I was not diagnosed early because of my mom's choice to not seek any kind of evaluation or intervention. So academically, I did all right. However, socially, I really struggled and needed a lot of supports that I did not receive. And I had no idea that my mom had considered that I might be autistic. She never told me. So finally, after all of my struggles and strengths, I noticed that I was really good at focusing in on things in ways that others couldn't, that I noticed details in ways that others couldn't, but that I struggled a lot socially, as I said. As that carried on with me out of secondary school, through college, and even into early career, I finally got to a place where I thought to myself, I wonder if autism, because I had heard about autism, And people had mentioned it to me before, and it was something that had resonated with me. But I wondered if the traits were different in those socialized as girls. And so, handy dandy Google, I looked it up and I found Rudy Simone's traits lists for autistic girls. And wow, all of them lined up to who I was, the strengths and the areas where I need supports. After that, I did a lot of research during my self diagnosis time, reading books and reading other people's personal accounts within the autistic community. I sought a diagnosis through a autism specialist who had experience with adults and with those socialized as girls. And after my evaluation with the DSM-5 and the interview, and it also included a survey they had to give to loved ones, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. It was probably one of the most important moments of my life because I learned I'm not broken, I'm neurodivergent, and I have strengths that I really truly believe contribute to society. All people are inherently valuable: autistics, allistics, neurodivergents, and neurotypicals.
But that's really interesting though, like the way it was processed, because I was in like the same boat really when my parents never told me I was autistic. I was diagnosed early, but I didn't find out I was autistic until I was 10. But I only found out through a special class really, and no one in my family told me I was autistic. So that is a bit of a connection really with parents not telling you you're autistic. I mean, that must have been a huge shock when you found out yourself.
Well, my parents didn't know that I was autistic. They had just suspected, and they didn't tell me that. And I think it was shocking in a sense because when I told my mother that I wanted to seek a diagnosis, she told me not to. She said, no, 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 don't do that. You're not autistic. You're not autistic. Then when I did end up seeking an evaluation, and at the end of the evaluation, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Afterward, I told my mom, and her response immediately was, I always knew. And that was shocking that my mom had spent so much time, even when I was an adult seeking a diagnosis on my own, she spent so much time trying to tell me, no, no, no. But in her heart, she knew, and she just couldn't have brought herself, I guess, to seek the diagnosis. I guess, there's always internalized stigma and bias, and seeing that within my own family kind of showed me how deeply ableism is rooted into society.
I know before we started the interview, you had a massive passion for writing, which has become a very important part with your life. And you had submitted articles to a company or an organization, I think it's called a neuroclastic. I think that's how you pronounce it. So it's kind of like a little blog, and I know I've looked into it, but I know I cannot pronounce things right. But when did you first take an interest in writing, and what made you start submitting articles for neuroclassic? Neuroclastic? Yeah, I'm gonna go with that.
Neuroclastic. I personally pronounce it neuroclastic. So you're good. You're good. I started writing as soon as I could write. I always wanted to write stories, and I wasn't an early reader. I learned how to read in kindergarten, but the moment I started reading, I could read beyond my grade level, and I started trying to write stories about the books that I was reading, namely the books that revolved around my special interests. I wanted to document all the things that I knew about my special interests, but then I took them further with my imagination and wanted to write stories down. That was something I was very passionate about. And that started with, something as small as Barbie dolls, moved into video games. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was a major special interest for me, and I would write stories and stories and stories. I actually wrote my first novel when I was in the sixth grade, and it was about the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It was fan fiction, but with the names changed. So I always had this desire to write out my ideas around my special interests. And then when I was diagnosed with autism, many autistics have had a similar experience where autism then becomes a special interest. And so I started writing about autism, and I started writing about it through Instagram, sharing different bits of advice or tips that I call Audi tips around coping strategies from an autistic perspective that I hope are healthier for autistics and more autistic centered rather than saying, okay, these are tips to be more neurotypical. These are tips to walk authentically autistic in a neurotypical world while still having coping strategies that could suit us and our needs. I think the Audi tips started out being 1 or 2 sentences long. And now it's like a daily battle to keep them in the word count that Instagram allows, because thankfully Instagram does have a word count max that keeps me structured in what to write and how to write in an accessible way. However, there are times when I do have more to say beyond the Instagram word count. And so when I have more to say on a topic, that is where I will write something for Neuroclastic in a blog. I think I've written around meltdowns. I've written about stimming because honestly, stimming, it's such an expansive topic. And I try to tackle it in short tips. But when it comes down to it, sometimes people just need to hear what stimming is, how it can be helpful, what it means when self-injurious stims happen. Does that mean stimming is bad? No. It means that an environment is probably not supportive, and different ways in which we can embrace stimming in our lives. And that's going to require more space. So whenever I get especially interested in a topic like that, where I feel like I have a lot that I want to say, then I'll move from Instagram into the blogosphere.
But that's really something that was absolutely amazing. And I know I read one of the articles about, oh, what was it? It was about going through anxiety and meltdowns in one article. And I found it so fascinating. And it made it a connection. It made me think of the connection to a book that you're going to be publishing next February, which is called The Boy at the Window. And I read the synopsis of the story, and it's absolutely very deep, but very, very interesting. So, what made you inspired to do that, to write The Boy at the Window?
Boy at the Window is the young adult fiction novel that I wrote during the pandemic, during lockdown. I was completely holed up in my home and very restless. And so I decided to return to fiction writing, which is something that I mentioned before, is I was very and have been always very passionate about. Boy at the Window talks about some topics that I am very, I guess, just passionate about in terms of social justice, in terms of inclusion. One of those being LGBTQ inclusion. So, Boy at the Window really covers what it's like for maybe some to grow up in a household that is not accepting of queer identity. Even more, Boy at the Window talks a lot about mental health and the impacts of our environment upon our mental health and how to walk through it and cope with it. So, not only does it touch on queerness, which I myself am queer, it also touches on race. And lastly, it touches on mental health. The protagonist, he struggles with depersonalization, derealization disorder, as well as maladaptive daydreaming. And these are things that have been a part of my life. So it was very helpful to think through from now my perspective where I'm in a stable phase, what it was like to be a teen going through that. And my hopes are that other teens can read this story, whether they're queer, whether or not they're a person of color, whether or not they are working through mental health conditions, that there's something in there for them to relate to or also to learn from. I also think it's a great love story.
No, sounds like it's a really, really inspiring story. I mean, like, it's so different to the other books that I've read, like for The Fault in Our Stars and The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. It's so different, and it really stands out on its own. So I think it's definitely one to look forward to during the beginning of the next year, really. And you'll have to keep us updated on how it goes on your Instagram page as well, because I know you've been sending updates in your stories at the moment on the book.
Yeah, I will do. Will do. Got to keep editing, that those revisions. I'll keep people up to date.
And then moving on from writing, because I know that you, and I hope I got this right, are a social justice influencer. So you are very passionate about what you do, especially with autism. And in the case of the events that are going on in America recently, well, as well as the last year, like Black Lives Matter, well, the Black Lives Matter movement, and also everything that's happening with the changing of the president, and then trying to make America a bit more inclusive. And this is something that a lot of people haven't really touched on from what I have seen already. And I've wondered that in the current events of the Black Lives Matter movement, do you think America needs to include more autistic people, especially in the Black and mixed race communities?
Well, I definitely think that intersectionality is a thing and will always be a thing. And if we are discussing the lives of Black people and Black biracial people, then we also are discussing the lives of Black autistics. That goes hand in hand. And during the Black Lives Matter movement resurgence of last year, I do believe that Black disabled lives matter became a movement, an additional like subset of the movement that was really important. And I want to just shout out JT Knox Roxas, who is also Jen White Johnson, who is the creator of the Black Disabled Lives Matter design that went around. And when I was at the protests last year that I went to, masked, of course, I did see that symbol, and it was very meaningful for me to see the Black Power fist with a neurodiversity symbol nested inside, and to know that the movement was making strides to include disabled voices. Is it perfect? Is it all the time? Of course, there's room for progress, but I'm seeing progress. And so long as I see progress, I feel hope. And I believe that we will get to a place where not only autistic lives, disabled lives matter, and Black lives matter, but that people will see on an equitable level Black disabled individuals.
I couldn't agree more, really, because I know that I know one person who's autistic, and she's from a mixed race community as well. And it's very easy to see that justice needs to be more done, because I know in the UK, loads of Black people and mixed race people on the autistic spectrum, they are very, very invisible, I want to say, because they don't really get recognized much, really. And it could be probably the same for the world as well, in terms of being inclusive, and then also in terms of getting respect, really, because I know there's a lot of bullying involved as well, especially when it comes to racism.
I definitely feel like as a biracial Black person who is on the autism spectrum, I have lived a lot on the margins of things, especially as a teen. It's less so now that I'm an adult, but as a teen and everyone's trying to figure out who they are and what groups we belong in, I had complications with feeling as though I belonged with white people because I am Black, and then with Black people because of issues of internalized racism and skin color privilege and different things like that that impacted my ability to build relationships because of those structures of hurt that were actually present, yes, even in teen years. And and so I lived, I believe, on the margins because of that experience as a teen. But then additionally, I'm autistic. And there were a lot of social interaction things that I felt I lived in a completely different world in. It's not that I don't know how to communicate, it's that I communicate differently. And so when I already grew up with this biracial difference, this different experience, and then I communicate differently, I did feel very alienated and ostracized a lot of the time. Now I believe that this time that I spent kind of pushed to that margin, I believe that that time has helped me to see a lot of different perspectives. Because being an outsider, yes, it means a lot of loneliness and social rejection, but it's also a place to be an observer. And as a result, I now feel as though I can do a lot of work to bring communities together because I see a lot of different perspectives. Because I was never really in a group with a perspective, I was always outside looking at others' perspectives.
That's definitely a good point there, actually. I couldn't really agree more. And then I know as a social justice influencer, you have so much that really means a lot to you. But I know that I've seen on your Instagram page, you have so many campaigns that you support. But I have to know which one means a lot to you and why is that the case?
I would say that they all mean equally, like they are all equally important to me. I don't believe that there is any social justice campaign or movement that does not rely upon the other movements in order for us to all build each other up and get to a goal of true inclusivity. However, burnout is a thing, and so are like personal resources and my ability to actually give adequately to different movements that shifts. So sometimes my goals that or my I guess my focus shifts depending on what's happening in the world, right? So if a certain cause takes on a very center stage, then I need to put energy into that because there's a community that is currently crying out or reaching out for help in a very specific way. But in my general dailiness, I do tend to stick to my autism special interest, LGBTQ justice, and racial justice. Those tend to be the top three that my focus is on. Racial justice, LGBTQ justice, autistic justice, all of that leads into education. All of that leads into daily living, the workplace, and all of it intersects with so much. So that's what I tend to focus on, but that lens expands to so many additional things. I mean, even within LGBTQ, nested within that is gender. And so I think it's hard to really just say that there's three things that I focus on, but I guess that's the way I start looking.
Now, that's really good though, because in a way, really, it's like there's a connection really in the same community. And I also know a few autistic friends who are in the LGBT plus Q plus community. That's it. And it's so interesting to see that even though there's a lot of awareness, nothing has changed pretty much really. But I know there might be some few people who are in the same boat as you, Lauren, and I know that there's going to be so many ways and there'll be so many differences to make, but we'll have to probably see how it goes in the future, really, because we still have a long way to go.
One step at a time. We can have goals for the future, but I try to follow goals for tomorrow. Otherwise, it can be very overwhelming when we see how much work there is to do. If we do the work one task at a time, we're always getting a little bit closer.
I know we've got like loads of questions really, but I know I'll probably have to wrap it up with one final question because I know that you are so inspirational with everything that you do, Lauren, and it's always amazing to see many people like you in this world, really, because we all need people like you. And then in America, because I know another friend of mine who is an ABA therapy survivor, and he always says that it's always very important for America to be inclusive, especially at this time where everything is a little bit of struggle. But I want to know, as one final question, what do you hope to see in the future in terms of inclusivity? I hope I got this right. Inclusivity of the autism community.
I mean, long term, big picture, beautiful goal. I would just like to see a world where all neurotypes are accepted and viewed as valuable inherently. And then words like neurotypical versus neurodivergent wouldn't exist because there would be no typical anymore. I would also like to see universal design learning in every classroom, and that kind of learning would no longer be viewed as something that is for these kids over there, but that supports and accommodations build everyone up. And differentiation is the key to really building an innovative and forward thinking society. So I think that would be my big goal. But small goal wise, I definitely think that we need to really look at the kinds of supports, like in quotations, supports that we are giving autistic children and autistic adults, and what our goals are for autistics. Are we trying to make autism go away? Are we trying to help autistics and support autistics as we strive to self acceptance and self love and really seeing our strengths as well as how to feel empowered and advocate for ourselves? Are we pushing for self determination, or are people trying to determine who autistic should be? And our supports that we receive in treatments or whatever people want to call it, they need to reflect self determination.
That's definitely really inspiring. And I know that in times of need, really, there's always going to be so many voices, but we're hoping in the near future, it's always going to be the case, really. And in the case in terms of hopefully very soon, but we still have a long way to go. But we're hoping that with more power and with more voices, anything is possible. But then, yeah, so we'll probably wrap it up there. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I think I have to say, though, it was really an honor to have you on, really, because I think, to be honest, though, even though it took a long time just when I started the podcast to interview you, I think it was absolutely amazing, really, just to have you on. But keep inspiring so many people, and hopefully, power to the people, we will make this a very inclusive place, really. And I also wish you the very best of luck for your book as well. And I really cannot wait to read it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, talking about all these different topics with me. And good luck moving forward. We got to keep this work going on together, striving together.
Oh, yes, I definitely couldn't agree more. And then, yeah, so many thanks to you, Lauren, for coming on. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And just remember, World Humanist Day is a day for everyone. And like what Lauren shared with her experiences, it's always important to have a voice to raise something for what you believe in. And next month, we're going back to our regular schedule where we're going to be talking about some very special sea creatures for a very special challenge for that is to do with the book. And until then, guys, I will see you next month. Take care. Bye.